JSpecify essentially wants to fix the billion-dollar mistake. And when I added this null stuff to Spring Boot, I found some null bugs. We separate our trash, we schedule our fun.
Yes.
That's how it works in Germany.
Okay. Welcome to IntelliJ IDEA Tech Talks, where we talk about technology, tools, and software development methodology. My guest today is Moritz Halbritter from Spring Team.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So as Moritz said, I work in the Spring engineering team. I primarily work on Spring Boot, but I'm also the team lead for start.spring.io, so the place where you go to bootstrap your boot application.
I bootstrap it from inside IntelliJ IDEA, but that calls start.spring.io.
That's fine too. So it uses the API, so I'm happy to.
Exactly. And then I don't have to leave my IDE and get distracted by the internet.
Yes.
So, so today we're going to talk about JSpecify and specifically how we can adopt JSpecify in our Spring projects. So,
right.
Well, take it away. Maybe explain a little bit what JSpecify is.
Right. So JSpecify essentially wants to fix the billion-dollar mistake. So the billion-dollar mistake is the famous thing from Tony Hoare where you have null pointer exceptions and stuff starts breaking in production. And JSpecify essentially came to the idea that this should be eliminated, and they have created a specification and a set of annotations which you can litter in your code, and then hopefully all null pointer exceptions are gone.
Yes, because, in Java, anything can be null at any time. So if we can make that a little bit less, that would be great. And we already had a video by Sebastian Deleuze on JSpecify with a bit of background. So it's a working group. It's a collaboration between Broadcom, JetBrains, Google, and a bunch of other folks, as you can see on the screen, collaborating to create a standard.
With the 15th standard.
Yeah. Or, why another one? So there are, of course, already other libraries that can do null annotations, but a lot of them are old, pre-Java 8 type use.
Right.
Some are tied to, or most of them are tied to specific tools and vendors.
Yes.
And the idea for JSpecify is to be tool and vendor agnostic so that everyone can use it. IDEs can support it. Frameworks and libraries are in the process of adopting it. I think we mentioned the Spring portfolio all use JSpecify annotations now, or for the most part.
Right.
And today we're going to talk about what does that mean for us as users of the Spring framework, and how can we JSpecify our own repositories.
Right. So with Spring Boot 4 and Spring Framework 7, essentially the whole Spring portfolio project upgraded to JSpecify. So they are all now JSpecified and have nullable annotations in their code. And we're going to take a look at what this means for your application. If you want to add JSpecify to your application, what does it look like?
Yep.
Okay, should we jump right into code?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, cool. So I've prepared a small demo application, which is a to-do list, and just to show how it looks like. This is my awesome front-end skills. There are some to-dos already in there. Just add a new one. So this is yours. Make silly jokes. Okay.
Okay, yeah. I think I don't need an actual task for this, but we are in Germany. Let's schedule the fun. Ordnung muss sein.
We are in Germany. Otherwise, if we don't plan it, nothing will happen.
Nothing will happen.
We separate our trash. We schedule our fun.
Yes.
That's how it works in Germany.
Okay, good.
Right, I'm going to assign it to you.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll do my best.
Your job, and it's super high priority, and it's totally in progress. Okay.
Yep.
So now we have it here. So this is the demo application. It's quite simple, just demo stuff. Okay. Let's take a look at how this is actually structured. So there's a to-do entry, which is our domain object. And as you can see, the domain object has a description, assignee, priority, due date, and those are all nullable. If you take a look at this nullable annotation, we can see that this is org Spring Framework lang. Okay.
Right, because Spring had its own nullable annotation, which was one of the 14 standards.
Right. Yeah. So Spring Framework from, I think, Spring Framework 5.2 or something like that already had their own nullable annotation. But this nullable annotation was not used over all the Spring portfolio projects. For example, Spring Boot never had them. Right. So if you interact with the Spring Boot API, you don't know if it can be null or not. Sometimes it's in a Java doc, but it's not annotated on the code.
Exactly.
Right. And this project is actually on Spring Boot 3, and we want to upgrade to Spring Boot 4, because if you use Spring Boot 4, you depend on Spring Framework 7, which depends on JSpecify. Okay?
Exactly.
And this is how we get the JSpecify dependency essentially in our project.
Right.
So let's check out this this revision, and now it's upgraded to Spring Boot 4.
Right.
Okay, let's index it again and get rid of that one, and let's take a look at the to-do entry again. It's still nullable, and here you can see this is still from Spring Framework.
Right, but it's marked as deprecated
It's
now.
deprecated, that's why it's yellow here, so we have to fix it.
Exactly.
It says use nullable instead. If you click on that nullable, you can see this is actually here, or JSpecify annotation nullable, so we somehow need to fix that. So you can either now replace all the imports, or we can use a tool for that, for example, Open Rewrite, which has a recipe. It's here.
Yep.
And we can just run this. And what it does is it takes a look at your applications in the code, and then it rewrites them to JSpecify.
Right.
Most
it
of
will
the time,
replace the imports from the Spring Framework ones to the JSpecify ones.
Right.
And maybe do a little bit extra.
Yeah, sometimes it moves stuff around because the annotation from Spring Framework is not a type use annotation, and the other JSpecify annotation is a type use annotation. So sometimes it moves a bit.
Right.
But most of the time it's replacing stuff.
Right.
Okay,
so we can run that.
We can just run that with Maven. Get our terminal. There are a lot of errors in there. Let's get rid of them. Never seen them. Just let it run. Okay,
And when you run an Open Rewrite recipe, do you look at the changes that it made and whether you agree with those, or?
Like I do with my AI agent.
Exactly.
Just
yeah.
commit and ship it.
Yes. What could possibly go wrong? Yeah.
It's no problem. The AI is responsible for that. Of course I.
We had this discussion before. Yeah. You're still responsible for the code that you ship, no matter who wrote it, whether it was a recipe or an AI agent.
Okay, it's very zoomed in, but you can see here it's replacing all Spring Framework lang to
exactly
nullable. Okay, this is most likely what it's doing.
Yeah, for this recipe, the blast radius is fairly contained, so it's easy to understand what's going on.
Yeah, true. It's only replacing essentially nullable annotations, and now you can see we have JSpecify annotations here.
Cool.
Okay, so this is the first part. Replace if you have already nullable annotations in there. You can replace them with JSpecify. We can talk about later what happens if you don't have any nullable annotations.
Right, and how to start adopting that.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Cool.
So we have that. What we want to do now is you can now see that there are nullable annotations in there, and there are already IntelliJ IDEA inspections running on top of that. So if you use, for example, this description field without a null check, it will warn you that you have to add a null check in there, right?
Right.
But what we ideally want to have is not an inspection, but we want the build to be break, right?
Yeah, we want to make sure that we have everything annotated that we should have annotated, and to break the build if not. Right. Because also, as we'll see, if you're using this from Kotlin, it has to be properly annotated or stuff will break on that side. So.
Right, Sebastian mentioned that in the other video that before JSpecify, we had no null checks in the build. So it was some team member sometimes checking IntelliJ inspections or other inspections about how to, if the null stuff is right, but there has been no thing in the CI which breaks, and which is bad, because if you put the nullable thing on the wrong type, then you break, for example, Kotlin users, or you break other Java users which have like compile time checks for null.
Right.
Which is bad.
Yes. You can also use Kodana, by the way, to run IntelliJ IDEA inspections either locally or in your build. So
those should find them too.
Yep.
Okay, but what we want to do is we want to have null check in our build.
Right.
And there's a Maven plugin for that. And this Maven plugin here is going to add NullAway.
Right.
Okay. So NullAway, and now it gets fun.
Yes, now it gets...
So NullAway is a plugin into error prone.
Right. And error prone is?
Error prone is a plugin into Java C.
Okay. So it's
I heard you
plugins
like
all the way-
plugins. You put
plugins
in
all the way
plugins
down.
in your plugins, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yo
So
dog, yeah.
error prone is a plugin which has been created by Google. And
Yes.
error prone has a lot of other checks. For example, it finds some other code flaws and stuff.
Yeah,
like
all
that.
kinds of static analysis that you can run on
Right.
your code to find potential bugs, essentially.
Right. And NullAway is a plugin into error prone. And
To specifically check for nullability.
Right. And we are, in this case, only interested in the NullAway checks and not the other error prone checks.
Right.
Okay? So, and we can take a look what it looks like without this plugin. Okay.
Right.
Because you can also configure that by hand. Put error prone in, configure error prone, put NullAway in, configure NullAway.
Right. So now we're looking at how to do that for Maven. If you want to know how to do that for Gradle, Sebastian showed that in his video. The same setup of having to add 3 different things.
Yes.
And then there's a Gradle plugin also that does all of them together.
Right.
Because as you can see, if you do this for Maven, you have quite the specification.
Yes, here a very long arg line and a lot of like add opens because you have to pry open the Java C essentially to get it working.
Right.
But you can also replace it with that one. Okay, this is essentially the code we need to copy and put it in our POM file.
Right.
And this is the parent POM, and we can just put it here.
Right, and this plugin then does all of that same configuration that you would otherwise do yourself.
Right.
And also, if you already have if you have other error-prone checks, this will gently merge them together so that they don't break each other. So way more convenient and also I think more clear to understand what actually is going on.
Right, you essentially express that you want to have nullability and you don't care that it is an error prone. You see no error prone in here.
Exactly.
Because it is behind the scenes. It's hidden from you.
Yep.
Right, so you have to specify the Maven compiler plugin version because otherwise you get a warning. And then you add the nullability Maven plugin and then it's hooking into your build and it's then null checking. Okay.
Right, and we don't have to specify JSpecify because we're getting that as a transitive dependency from Spring.
Oh, that's true. Let's see, we can click at this one and it's like, let's get rid of all the windows here. And you can see the usages of, for example, the domain, there is JSpecify in there.
Right.
Right, you can see this is transitively inherited from some Spring Core, right? Spring Core, which is the core of the Spring framework, directly depends on JSpecify, and you get it and you can use it.
Right.
This is why you don't find any annotation in here. Okay, so now we have this in here. Let's see what it looks like. So we are first going to do a clean and a compile. And it breaks.
So adding NullAway broke our build, or rather shows that our build was always broken.
Yeah, so NullAway in this case breaks our build, but it's broken because there are bugs in it.
Right, it's basically showing us where our build was suboptimal, where we might get nullability bugs and null pointer exceptions.
It's a bit like the Maven Enforcer plugin. You put it in there, you get screened at a lot,
yes,
and then you fix all the stuff. And then your
but
clean
it's
is better.
basically like, if you don't have NullAway or the Enforcer plugin, your build is also broken, you just don't know about it.
Right.
And now you know what's wrong and you can actually fix it.
Yeah.
So
and now you have essentially static analysis, which uses the type system, which is now null-aware, to find your bugs. This is essentially like going from JavaScript, which has no types, or dynamic types, or Python, which has dynamic types, to something which is actually typed. And then, of course, if you copy paste your code and do TypeScript, then first everything is broken.
Yes.
Broken. But then you fix it, and then while fixing it, you actually find some bugs.
Right.
And when I added this null stuff to Spring Boot, I found some null bugs.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So Spring Boot is better, not just because we have JSpecify now, but also because in the process you found a bunch of bugs.
Right. So Spring Boot is now better for users because you have a null annotated API, but it's also better because there are less bugs in it because we found them by static checking the null flow stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And this is what we're going to do here. And the first thing what it's going to do is it's going to scream at you that there is NullMarked missing. So what's NullMarked? NullMarked is one of the 4 annotations which are in JSpecify.
Yes.
Okay, there is NullMarked, There is at nullable,
Yes.
at non-null,
Yes.
and null unmarked. This is where the fun begins. Okay.
What does this mean?
We're going to see.
I mean, nullable and non-null makes sense, you know. And now we're getting into the hardest problem in computer science, which is naming things.
Yeah.
You know, there are two hard problems in computer science, right?
Which one?
Naming things, cache invalidation, and off by one errors.
Yeah, very good.
I was told to make silly jokes.
Very good. Okay. Should I mark the to-do as completed, or are there more silly jokes?
There might be more.
Okay.
I don't know. If there's an opportunity for silly jokes, I will make the silly jokes. Sorry.
Very good. Okay. So this thing here now screams that you have to put NullMarked on your code.
Right.
Okay. What to do with this? I start at the domain model, and we can now put NullMarked on all our classes. And what this means is that you essentially opt into nullability.
Right.
So let's put
we could put NullMarked individually on fields or classes, but we can also do it on package level, right?
And this is what we're going to do. So
exactly.
Because if you put it on the package level, it inherits to all the classes inside this package.
Right.
Okay, so let's first create a package info file, because this is how you add annotations to packages.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if you are familiar with a package info, but package info, you can put, for example, Javadoc for packages in there, but you can also annotate this thingy. So NullMarked, okay?
Right.
And what NullMarked does is, it's a bit like Kotlin. If you know the Kotlin type system, it has those pesky platform types.
Platform types being using Java from Kotlin, and because anything in Java can be null at any time, Kotlin doesn't know whether it's null or not, whereas the Kotlin type system assumes things to be not null.
Yeah.
So that's why working with Java libraries from Kotlin is fun.
Yeah.
Because everything is fun in Kotlin, but in this case it's fun.
Everything is fun in Kotlin. And this is essentially...
Apart from maybe working with unspecified Java types.
If you stay in your Kotlin universe and everything is Kotlin, that's super great, because then everything is like null safe. But as soon as you step over the boundary, you essentially fall off the cliff, and then you are in null unspecified land. And this is essentially the same problem what we have now with JSpecify. We have code which has annotations.
Yes.
And we have code which have no annotations. So we have not only null and non-null, but we also have like, I don't have no idea, which is called unspecified nullness in the JSpecify specification.
Yes.
And to get rid of that, we have to mark our code as null marked. And this essentially says everything which is null in this code, I'm going to mark with at nullable.
Right. And everything that is not marked is assumed to be not null.
Right.
And that's, of course, the state that we want. Yes. So it makes it explicit. If you have to mark this can be null, it makes it explicit what can be null, and maybe gives you an idea of thinking about whether that actually should be null, and maybe eliminate more null in your code base.
So the idea behind NullMarked is that you have less stuff which can be null than stuff which can't be null.
Which is hopefully already the case.
Yes,
but
otherwise you're going to write a lot of ifs.
Yeah.
And then there is also null unmarked. And null unmarked is you annotate a package with null marked. And then every class in there is essentially, you have to annotate null. But what is if there is a class which you can't annotate because you don't have time, or because it doesn't fit like the time budget or whatever?
You're currently in the process of marking everything, but we didn't get here yet. So this is currently null unmarked.
Right. You can opt out of null marked with null unmarked.
And then it's the unspecified state.
And then it's in the unspecified state again.
Okay,
right.
Cool.
Okay. So I've now put null unmarked and null marked on this package. So everything in there, and I now have to annotate stuff which can be null as at nullable.
Right. And if it's not, it will yell at us, right?
Yes. So let's run again and see what it happens. So let's get rid of the clean. Just to compile. Okay. And
there we go.
Yeah, it's yelling at us.
Oh no.
Let's take a look at this. Okay, click the arrow. Let's maximize this. Okay. Oh, it actually complains about, like, IntelliJ also has inspections for nullability, and here you can see it's yellow. Yellow is always like not so good. It's better than red.
It's warning.
Yeah. But let's see. Method invocation name may produce null pointer exception. Okay. So let's take a look. What is this? Priority. Oh, okay. So the priority of a to-do entry is actually nullable, and I'm going to call .name on it. And if this
Which
is null,
in that, given just that context, it would be correct that, hey, this can be null. So if I call a method on it, that could produce a null pointer exception.
So you must guard it essentially with an if.
Yeah.
Do an if check somewhere or use a method which does an if check.
Which coincidentally,
we have.
Yes.
There is the has priority method.
Exactly.
And the has priority method, we put an entry in there and this does the null check.
Yes.
Okay, and now it's weird.
Yeah.
Because we do the null check, but this thing still yells at us.
Yeah.
Why's that?
Yeah. So, I think this could be better on our side then.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, what do we do to fix this?
So this is called a false positive.
Yes.
So IntelliJ IDEA and NullAway both think that this stuff here can be null, but if you read the code and understand the code, you know that it can't be, right? So we now have to fix this false positive, and there are like 3 ways, or maybe 4, I don't know if I want.
Multiple ways, yeah.
Multiple ways to fix that. So the first thing is, of course, we can just inline this check, okay? And let's see if I remember the shortcut. I think it's this one. Yes.
Yes.
Inline usage is great. Okay, we keep the method.
You learned a new shortcut today, right? Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah. And now the warning from IntelliJ is gone. And let's see if we can compile it again with NullAway.
Yeah, because the checks don't always align between IntelliJ null checks and NullAway null checks.
Yes. We're going to see that afterwards. The IntelliJ null checker is more clever than the NullAway one.
Yay.
Yeah. So it still yells at us, but this is a different error, okay?
A different error, progress.
Yes, but the problem is I have now changed my code and I want to have this has priority method, right?
Yes.
I don't want to inline it.
Right.
It's forcing me to inline it, but I don't want to. So let's roll it back. How to fix that otherwise? What we can also do is we can put an assert in there.
Yes.
And assert is essentially telling NullAway or IntelliJ IDEA, please shut up. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to check it. The assert will crash at runtime.
Yep.
But I'm sure that this can't be null. There is, for example, the assert class from Spring Framework. You can say not null, and then you put in entry.priority and some error message, not null, hopefully. And then you see the yellow one thingy is gone.
Yeah, because we have the check just above it.
Right. And
to
now
check that it's not null.
Now the null checker is smart enough that it knows if this method has not thrown an exception, here it can't be null.
Right, but instead of getting a null pointer, we would now get an exception if it is null.
I think you still get a null. I think you get an illegal state exception. So you essentially traded illegal argument exception for a null pointer exception if it can be null. But you put an assert in there, and an assert means, yeah, I'm reasonably sure that this is not null. And if it's null, it's actually a bug. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So this is the other way you fix it. You put an assertion in there.
Right.
Okay. But let's say you don't want assertions because you think like it's stupid to check it twice. Right? You can also do this one. A suppress warning, NullAway, with a small. Okay. This also shuts up NullAway. It doesn't shut up IntelliJ. So maybe there's an improvement.
For us there, okay.
Right, so
we'll
we will
discuss with the product managers afterwards.
Very good.
Yes, thank
File
you.
a bug.
Yes.
So NullAway is now switched off for this method. But be super careful with that stuff.
Right, because if I have this suppression and I change this method to where it might throw a null pointer exception somewhere, I'm now suppressing that, so I won't find that null bug.
You can do all kinds of funny stuff. For example, this here is a non-nullable type, right? There is no @nullable on it. That means this stuff can't be null. But I can totally do something like this.
Yep.
And this is now fine for NullAway. And you broke
IntelliJ will warn you again with the yellow,
NullAway, you've broken the type system.
Yep.
You said this stuff can't be null, but you return null.
Yep.
If this is exposed for Kotlin users, they now have a problem. They now get a non-nullable type. If they do a null check against it, they get a warning, but actually it returns null. Okay, so I would use the suppress warning NullAway as little as possible.
Yes, because there are actually, I think there is a recommendation in the Spring documentation to use suppressions here and there, but use them sparingly and carefully. Right.
There is also a different kind of warning which NullAway gives you, which is called uninitialized fields. For example, you have a field, private string foo, and then this thing is null by default. So you have to annotate it as nullable because like the default value of the field is null. Right. But there are lifecycle methods. For example, in Spring Framework, there is the initializing bean thingy, and there is a method which is called after property set. This is guaranteed to be called when the Spring context starts. And if you assign the field in there, the field has a value, right? But NullAway doesn't know about this Spring behavior.
Right. Yeah.
And then you have to suppress the warning, for example.
Yeah, and we have some support in IntelliJ IDEA as well for some of these false positives, because we are aware both of NullAway and, of course, how the Spring framework works. So we know that Spring will initialize it, and we can have a quick fix to suppress those false positives to get the NullAway to be quiet in the build.
For example, the same problem with add value. If you put a field with add value on it, you know that the value won't be null. It's read from the environment, and then it's put into this variable.
Exactly, but NullAway doesn't know that because it has no Spring awareness, but IntelliJ has Spring awareness and knows that, and has then a quick fix to suppress it.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so now the last thing I want to show, and this is like an interesting topic because we could do another 45-minute talk on that one.
Maybe we will someday. Who knows?
Okay, let's rewrite the method a bit.
Yep.
So take this. We change the parameter here to nullable priority. We rename this thing here to priority because it's now a priority. Okay, and now you can see what we have done here has priority. We put the priority directly in it, and this method returns true if it has a priority and false if the priority is null. Okay. You see that the IntelliJ IDEA tracker is now clever enough. Okay, the yellow thingy is gone.
Yep.
Let's run NullAway and see what happens. It's still broken.
Okay.
It complains that this stuff can be null. Okay, this is interesting because you now have a false positive in NullAway, but you no longer have an IntelliJ IDEA. So you can see the null checker in IntelliJ is smarter than the NullAway thingy. Okay, but how to fix that? How to fix it properly? There is an annotation which is called that contract. Okay,
and we're getting that from Spring framework, I saw. Yeah. Okay.
That's a very interesting discussion.
Let's finish this and get back to it.
Okay, it has one attribute which is called value, and here you have to specify a DSL for null stuff. Okay, and what I say here is if you put a null in there as the first parameter, the return value is going to be false.
Yep.
Okay. Well, this here specifies the first parameter. This here is the return type. Okay. So you put null in there, it's false. This is what this code is doing.
Exactly what it does. Yeah.
Okay. And now let's run NullAway again. Okay. This is a different error. This is not the one we've been getting.
We were fixing, yeah.
So now it's clever enough to find out, okay, has priority, has a contract on it. I put null in there. It returns false, and I know this if branch is not going to be used.
Right, we know that it's been checked.
Right. So this contract annotation here, to answer your question, you can see the DSL here. Mm-hmm. It's from org Spring Framework Spring Core.
Yes.
And not from JSpecify. And if you take a look at how many contract annotations you have.
So exactly, and we said like the whole point of JSpecify is to be tool, framework, vendor agnostic.
Yeah.
And I think that this is one of the topics that the working group is still working on to standardize the contract annotation, because I think also there might be slight differences between these different contract annotations. Yeah. Which reminds me of when we had the application where we were using Yoda time and then moved to the Java local dates. Which was fun.
Nice
fun times.
Subtlety changes, yes.
Yes.
So you have one in Micrometer, the one from Spring Framework, SRJ has one, JUnit has one, and a lot of other projects have one. And JSpecify essentially works on how to
standardize them so that we can replace all of them with the one JSpecify standardized framework agnostic.
Yeah, with all the specification behind that. Because, I mean, JSpecify is only like 4 annotations and it took a long time to produce them. Yeah. And it's not the work to write the annotations, it's the work to specify all the nullness stuff, because this gets like hairy very fast when we talk about generics, for example.
Yes. And
this is the same with contract. Contract looks simple. It's essentially an annotation with one attribute. How hard can it be to create that? The problem is what you can write in that string and how it should behave.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a lot of hard work to make it look that simple, I guess.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Simplicity is always hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Those are the ways to fix it. Either you suppress the warning, that's the worst option. You add an assert, that's fine. We have some asserts in Spring Boot too.
Yep.
Or you put a contract in there.
And what is your preferred way?
My preferred way is absolutely the contract, if you can do it with an add contract, because that's the most cleanest way with the least side effects, and it has like no runtime effects.
Okay.
Then put in it. If that doesn't work, put an assert in it. Of course, it's going to double check the null, but okay.
I better check once extra than not at all, I guess. Yeah.
And the worst option is like suppress the stuff.
Yeah, because then you might still introduce the bugs, like we said.
Yes.
And would there be any downsides because we have like the different contracts? I assume you would recommend using the same contract everywhere, so you don't have.
Yes, I mean, as a Spring team member, I must recommend
use the
Spring
one, of course. Yes.
But
at least like pick one and don't mix and match. Yeah.
Pick one and stay with it. Right?
Yeah.
For the sake of consistency.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. What else do we have? We have a lot of other stuff.
Right.
It screams at us because this is not working, but it still screams at us for the other modules.
Right.
So you have to put this package info file in every package you have.
Right.
And if you create a sub package,
you have to put it there as well.
Yes, because there are no sub packages in Java. They don't have inheritance from one top level package to the lower ones.
Right.
So you have to put it everywhere.
Yeah, and I think I saw for the Maven plugin, there's a configuration that you can automatically propagate them to the sub-packages as well, because if you have to do that manually, you might forget when you create a new sub-package. So you can configure the Maven plugin to actually automatically create the package info for the sub-packages as well.
Right.
Which, well, I would probably recommend so that you can't forget.
Yeah, it essentially generates package info files in your generated source folder, and then NullAway runs on them. Right. But we are going to copy that over.
Yep.
Here. Now this thing here is NullMarked, and this thing here is NullMarked too. Okay. Let's run it again. Okay. Now we get a different error because now it doesn't scream at us because we don't have package info files, but now it actually has found something.
Right.
Let's take a look at this.
So it found something, because we say null marked, it's found something that we didn't mark as nullable, but can be null.
Yes, because we are now in NullMarked scope, we have to annotate everything which can be nullable with at nullable. Right?
Exactly.
And here we have a problem. Passing null argument to a parameter annotated as not null. Okay,
exactly.
Let's take a look at this method. Okay, we haven't annotated it as not null, but it's in NullMarked scope, therefore it behaves like it is at not null.
Exactly.
And we want to actually pass null in here because this ternary operator here passes in a null, and we're going to add the nullable here. Okay, this is actually one of the things which we found. We found a bug, right? This should have been annotated with the old org Spring Framework lang nullable, but it wasn't because I forgot it.
Exactly.
Right? And now it has found a bug.
Exactly. So this is why it's good to check in your build whether everything is properly annotated.
Yeah. Because if you expose this stuff to Kotlin, you have a type which is string without a question mark, and now Kotlin users can't invoke this method with a null. It's not possible. The Kotlin compiler says you can pass in a null. It's a nullable string.
Exactly.
But the implementation actually can use a null. So you now have created a bug which is only there for Kotlin users, which is like bad.
Yes.
So put a nullable on there.
Yep.
Run again. Great, we have a green build.
I like it when the build is green.
But wait.
Oh no, there's more.
I've said the IntelliJ null checker is more clever than the NullAway one. Right? The IntelliJ IDEA null checker is better. Let's run it. Run inspection by name.
Yes. And
then you can type. Oh, my screen is so my screen is so small that I can't get rid of the null. So I put a null there in the text box which opens. And you run nullability and data flow problems.
Right.
And this opens a screen which is very broken now because I've zoomed in too much.
Like I said, if you zoom too much, not all of the pop-ups scale appropriately, but you know.
essentially, what we're going to do is we run this inspection to the whole project, and then you can configure nullable annotations, which you want to take effect, and org JSpecify nullable is in there by default. And this is the preferred annotation. That's great, because that's our preferred annotation too.
Right.
So let's run it.
Like you said, the IntelliJ null checker is smarter than the NullAway, so this will find some places where it can also be null that NullAway hasn't found.
Right.
So if we want to double proof our application for nullability bugs,
run both. Run NullAway and then run the IntelliJ IDEA null checker.
Yeah.
And it's found something. Passing null into a parameter which is not annotated as not null. Okay, what's going on here? There's a map, and we put a null key in there.
Why do you put a null key in a map?
It's super production ready code, what I've written here. Okay,
No, for the record, this is a demo app. No production environments were harmed in the making of this demo. Yeah.
Full disclosure, I've done a lot of horrible stuff which I would not do in any production code base and not in the Spring Boot code base, for example, in there, just to show how the null stuff is working.
Exactly.
Okay,
Like,
that's
don't
why
do this in real life. This is demo code.
Right. Don't do this at null. Don't do this in real life, kids.
I have a friend who actually then puts that in the demo code, like demo code for demo purposes only. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. So what we do here is we put a null key in there, and it's actually documented, of course. Here I documented it, right?
Yeah, because people read the documentation.
Of course, every time. Yeah. Okay. So how to fix that? I've said earlier, everything which is like annotated as nullable can be null, but the rest can't be null.
Right.
I did not,
because of the NullMarked.
Because of the NullMarked.
Yeah.
I did not annotate the string here. Okay.
Right.
Therefore, it can be null.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to do is I'm putting null here. So IntelliJ screams at me.
Yes.
Rightfully. NullAway didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
So here is something which this thing finds. IntelliJ IDEA checker finds, but NullAway didn't. To fix that, we put the nullable on the generic type argument.
Yep.
And this is what I've said earlier. This is now a type use annotation. If you take a look at what the target is now a type use. And type use means I can put it on classes, on methods, on local variables and other stuff, but I can also put it on generic parameters.
Right.
And here I'm going to say this map can actually contain a nullable string key.
Right, and I think this is one of the things that JSpecify can do that a lot of the other checkers cannot.
Yes.
To mark generic types.
Right, because this type use thingy here, if we take a look at type use, this is since Java 1.8.
Right.
So if the annotations have been created before 1.8, they are absolutely not type use. Okay.
Right.
And this is one of the big reasons why to adopt JSpecify. It's very nicely standardized, it's vendor agnostic, and it's type used.
Yes.
So you can express stuff like this map has a null key, this map has null values, this list is a list of string, and those strings can be null, or the list which contains null strings can also be null.
Exactly.
Okay? And all other
very fine-grained control of what can and cannot be null.
Right. Yeah. And this is where the fun begins. A lot of the JSpecify specification talks about nullable in case of generics, because this stuff gets funny very fast.
Yep.
Okay. Now it's still complaining here because I pass in this map of nullable string into this assignee report constructor. Yep. And here it expected a NullMarked thingy, but it got a nullable. Okay. So what it's telling me here is I should also annotate this here.
Right.
Okay, because a map of string assignee entry is not the same as a map of nullable string assignee entry.
Yep.
Okay. Run the inspection again. And now we see did not find anything to report.
Cool.
Okay.
So our application is a lot more null safe.
Right. We can now run a verify here. Hope that it didn't mess up the tests.
Cool.
Great. Green build.
Awesome. So we also talked about using this from Kotlin then?
Yes. Okay, for that, let's revert all the stuff. Check out the commit, which, get rid of them. And check out the commit where we have lined up the Kotlin code. This is also very interesting. So branch main checkout. And now there is, let's see, reload this Maven project here.
Yep.
Okay. And there is now a CLI in Kotlin. Let's see if this works here.
Yeah, because the Kotlin compiler can interpret the JSpecify annotations as of Kotlin 2.1, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Yeah.
And so that will apply the JSpecify annotations to the Kotlin type system.
Right. We're going to see that in an example, but let's first run it. And what it does is it's a small CLI built on top of the core I've essentially done. The file is locked. Okay, because I did not stop it, and H2 doesn't like concurrent access. Okay, I now have a prompt here. I can type ls to see all the to-dos. Your to-do is still there.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
we can take a
if
look.
I have any more silly jokes, I will make them. Yes.
Very good.
We
Okay.
scheduled the fun in Germany. Yes.
We scheduled the fun. It's still in progress, and it's very high priority. Okay.
Yes.
So this is a small CLI I just built to show how to interact with the Java functional core, which I've written via Kotlin API.
Yeah.
Okay. And please forgive my Kotlin, which I've written, because I'm usually a Java developer and I write Kotlin like I write my Java, and it's absolutely horrible to look at, I guess.
I mean, if I speak German, my sentence structure might also be more Dutch than German. So, I get that. Yeah.
That's it. So please don't scream at me in the comments. What I did to butcher all the Java code, the Kotlin code, it's horrible. Okay, but
or give some suggestions on how to make it better.
Yeah, also put like the question mark .let everywhere. It's great.
Yes.
Okay. Here you can already see a suggestion: explicit get call replace. Okay, cool. I already fixed one.
Ooh, IntelliJ can actually help you Kotlinify. This is a verb. Kotlinify is a verb.
Kotlinify is a verb. Very good. So Kotlinify my code. Okay.
I may or may not have done commits in the past where we were migrating Java to Kotlin and like literally commit message Kotlinify.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we can see here, this to-do entry, which we fetch here to do, this is actually calling Java code. Okay.
Yes.
This find by ID here is specified in Java code. And here you can see we're using the title, we're using the status, and we're using the description. And the description is defined as @nullable string description. That means this description here is, we can see it in the pop-up, but we can see it as soon as we extract this variable and add this type explicitly. We can see this is a string with a question mark.
Right.
And this means it's nullable.
Right.
Right? Because the Kotlin compiler reads this @nullable annotation from JSpecify and then translates it into the Kotlin type system.
Right.
And now we have everything which is annotated as nullable, we have with a question mark. And the cool thing is, if you are in a NullMarked scope, all the stuff which is not annotated as nullable is no longer a platform type.
Right.
It's now a real non-nullable type in Kotlin.
Right.
And that's the cool thing about the involvement of JetBrains with JSpecify, because the Kotlin compiler now understands that stuff.
Yeah, and of course the collaboration also between JetBrains and the Spring team to make Spring easier to use for Kotlin as well. Yeah,
right. So, and also like, because IntelliJ IDEA knows about Spring, it can suppress warnings actually from NullAway and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's super cool. So what we can see here now, this description, we have to add this null check. And if we add, for example, a null check for if to-do.status is null, you can already
yeah, because status was non-null, right? And so then IntelliJ will tell you, you don't need this check.
Yes, condition is always false, which means you don't need this check because this type here is actually a non-nullable type. So let's see this here. So, and if we put it, you can see there is no exclamation mark, no platform type. So this is a non-nullable type.
Cool.
This is how it works with Kotlin.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's super cool. In the ideal world is that every Java library annotates their code with JSpecify, because this helps Kotlin users.
Yes.
But it also helps like every Java user who's using
those
IDE,
libraries, yeah.
Right? Because you get warnings, and of course, like every user who has like NullAway or other null checkers in their build. That would be a super cool scenario, but I guess it will take some time to get.
It was so. How long did it take you to to add null JSpecify to what was it, Spring Boot, which didn't have any?
Yes.
annotations yet?
Spring Boot didn't have any annotations in there. So I took like 4 months to add them
Yep.
bit by bit. I mean, Spring Boot is a big code base.
Yep.
But it still took a long time. But it uncovered bugs, and I totally think the API is now better because of it.
Right.
And the code quality is too. Because we always had the problem when I write a feature in Spring Boot, I don't know if this stuff can be null. And then I have to trace it, or you have to ask IntelliJ if it can be null or not.
Mm-hmm.
But now I know explicitly. I just look at, is it at nullable? If it's at nullable, it can be null.
Right, and you have the NullAway to check during build time. So if you make any changes and you forget an assert somewhere, NullAway will yell at you. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I think the last thing to do.
Right. It would be, okay, what if you're migrating from a project and you don't currently have any nullability annotations at all? How would you get started? Like, well.
Right. I have some tips because this is essentially the same problem which I had in Spring Boot.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. So check out this one. What I did in this commit is I removed all the package info files and all the nullable annotations. There is no add nullable in there anymore.
Right.
There's one in the README, but that isn't code. There is none in the code.
Right.
Okay. Let's run our build. Let's do it this way. Okay. It starts to scream because we don't have any package info files with NullMarked on there.
Right.
Okay. But instead of like copy pasting this NullMarked thingy in every package, what I would do is I would first configure the nullability plugin to opt out of the explicit null marking.
Right, because we're just getting started. So instead of having to mark everything, you want to
do it bit by bit.
Bit by bit. And in the meantime, while you're working on it, you want to ignore these warnings.
Right. If I compile now, everything is fine. Okay? Because NullAway now only works on annotations, on packages which are actually annotated as at NullMarked, and I don't have any annotated.
Right.
And then I would look at my modules, and in my modules, the domain module is the one with the least incoming dependencies. Okay, so the stuff doesn't depend on like anything else. This is what I would start with, right? From the bottom up, essentially.
Yes.
And then add a package info file in here. Put add NullMarked on it, and then run the build again.
Right, and then you find the first issues where you might need to mark stuff.
Yeah.
You start marking that.
Look at one of those. It looks like this. Okay, IntelliJ also finds it. Passing null per argument to add nullable. Let's see. Okay, there is no quick fix available for that, but we can. Is it here? No. But you can put add nullable in here because it can be null. IntelliJ also says this here.
Yep. Should
not receive a null as an argument. Okay, I put nullable on here. I put nullable on here. I put.
We could even use the multiple carrots, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Let me fix that. Show another cool feature. It's this.
Yep.
And now
now you have to type it only once.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay. Compile it again. This stuff is fixed now. Now we're back at this problem here. You remember the contract because this stuff here can be null, put nullable on it, and so forth and so forth. What you can also do is you can, of course, run the inspection, the null inspection, run it on your project, fix all the problems, run NullAway, and then it's done. And you go module by module, essentially.
Right. And you said top down, so something that doesn't depend on a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
You start there, and then, gradually the stuff that depends on that.
Yeah. This is
until you hit your API, and then it's clearer for your users.
Right. This is what I've done in Spring Boot. I've essentially started with the core modules, annotated that, committed it. Then I've used all the stuff which calls this module, annotated them. And then sometimes it can happen that you have to go back to your core module and fix stuff there because some of the callers pass in null.
Right.
And this is an iterative process.
So the core doesn't know that it's being called with null, but you find out that something else is actually calling it with null, meaning that you have to mark it.
Yes. And then you have to, of course, first find out is this null a bug or is this a real use case? If it's a real use case, you have to annotate it with add nullable and then go from there. And essentially it's fixing, compiling stuff, fixing, compiling stuff.
And have you had any use cases where you didn't know that people were using it with null, or are you always able to figure out whether there is a valid use case for null?
We have a lot of tests. because of that, we also annotated the tests because of this, because tests are a big consumer of our API.
Right.
And therefore we know, but sometimes we actually get bug reports on that. For example, why can't I pass null in there? It's a valid use case. And then I take a look at it and says, yeah, well, I've missed
that
a
makes
nullable.
sense. Okay, yeah.
This is a bug.
Okay.
So if you find any Spring Boot API which you think there should be a null passed in, or it should return a null or something like that, please let us know. It's most likely a bug where I just forgot to add nullable.
Right. And similarly, you mentioned earlier that, or when we were preparing for this, you mentioned that also you sometimes find bugs in NullAway and you file those and those get fixed. So I really like how it's the collaboration in the ecosystem between different projects. Yeah.
So working with the NullAway maintainer is super cool because we essentially report false positives. He's fixing them. We're consume the next API. Super cool.
Yeah.
That's the next version. It's super useful. NullAway, great project.
Yeah.
Would recommend.
Well, you use it in Spring
as
well, right?
We use it in Spring as well. Yes, every Spring portfolio project is essentially checked with NullAway.
Right.
And on compile time.
So, and if people are currently using other checkers, would you recommend that they also move to JSpecify or keep what they have, or do you have any opinion on that?
If your checker is like JSpecify capable, and you're happy with the checker, just stay with it. Yeah. I see no way. I see no reason to switch. But if you're looking for one, I can say NullAway is a great one.
Yep.
We have looked at some of the others, but JSpecify was a bit fresh off the press, and most of the checkers don't have JSpecify support, but they have other annotations. But we wanted to have JSpecify. Yep. So we ended up in NullAway. And NullAway also can check other nullable annotations, and it has a JSpecify mode, which the Maven plugin automatically activates, and this stuff does stuff like check lists with nullable strings and stuff.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's essentially JSpecify for the contract, right? Put JSpecify in your libraries, put JSpecify in your project, then use an IDE like IntelliJ IDEA, which has interesting null flow analysis and can help you fix problems.
And JSpecify support as of version 2025.3, if I'm not mistaken.
So that was super helpful to with the journey from Spring Boot JSpecifying.
Yep.
The null flow analysis is very good.
Yeah, but also for us, if you find any bugs where it doesn't work properly, like we found a few, please let us know and file the issues in U-Track.
Right. Then you use essentially Spring Framework because it gives you JSpecify for free. Yep. And all the APIs already annotated, so you can be sure if you program against it that you get the null if it's really nullable and not otherwise. Yeah, and then put NullAway in your build to let it check on compile time, because only then you can be sure that it's correct.
Right.
And that's the JSpecify story, essentially.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing and for the demo.
I hope it was helpful.
And we hope it's helpful to help you adopt JSpecify in your Spring projects.
Cool. So, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining, and we'll see you at the next IntelliJ IDEA Tech Talks.
Bye.
Bye.